Okay, so other than not being able to finish it, what do you think about it, Tessa?
I like it.
It requires,
It's going to help me.
yes, it requires you to really get in the Bible, which I think is something that I need help with. I feel like that's probably a pretty Christian thing to need help with. So, okay, so let's just start. We'll just start at day 1 with Ruth. Now, is there anybody that wants to share, like give us a synopsis of the story of Ruth, maybe so that if somebody doesn't know it? Or what you do know about it. Does anybody know anything about Ruth? Let's start there.
She was their mother-in-law.
Okay. Okay. It's a little 4-chapter book in the Old Testament. This is the first book, I believe, that's named after a woman in the Bible. Is the first one that we come to. So just a quick rundown. Ruth married into a family of Israelites. The Israelites were in a famine. But if you go all the way back to the beginning of the Old Testament, when Moses is giving all the law, they tell them, do not, whatever you do not intermarry with any of the ites, any of the original inhabitants of Canaan, because they worship false idols and they're going to end up pulling you down. Okay, and then like through the Old Testament, all the time, it's addressed multiple times, because if you know anything about the Old Testament, Israel will straighten up and then they fall off, and Israel will straighten up and then they fall off. Okay, so this is one of the commandments: do not intermarry with anybody that was originally in the land of Canaan. The Moabites, which Ruth was a Moabite, were one of the original inhabitants, so they were not supposed to intermarry at all. Okay, so what happens is that Naomi's husband decides, as head of the household, that we're going to leave this land and we're going to go to where they have food, which I feel like is a tough choice. But he also knew that he was probably going to get into some sticky places, because God had specifically said, don't intermarry with these people, don't worship other idols, don't put yourself in a situation where you're going to be vulnerable, pretty much, which is a lot of the quote-unquote rules about Christianity. You know, it's not a lot of things that we're not supposed to do. He just says, better if you don't go there so that you aren't vulnerable. Okay, so Naomi's husband makes this choice, and we're going to go over here so we have something to eat. And they have 2 sons. So they go to Moab, where there's no drought, there's no famine, there's food. And their boys marry these Moabites. Okay, so there's a big, we're not supposed to do that kind of thing going on right here. So already, before the story even develops, there's a lot of stuff going on that, according to the law, shouldn't be, right? And then there's also some debate whether about their faith in God at all, because obviously he had sent them to the land of Canaan, even though he knew Israel was going to mess up 1 billion times over, just like we do. But there's also that question of how much faith did they have, because they didn't stick it out. They left and went where there was food. Then on the reality part of that, as women who, you don't have any children, do you? Okay, who someday hope to have children, how would you not make that call? Like, we're starving. Even if I die, I want my kids to live. You know, so there's a huge divide there. Okay, so they go to Moab. The boys marry these girls. Then all the men die. Everybody dies. So if you know anything about Old Testament culture, you know that women could not hold property. A lot of times they were viewed as property. So this is a big deal. So now Naomi is a foreigner in Moab. She's lost her husband. She has nothing. So she makes the decision to go back to where she came from. So this is where the Ruth part kind of develops, because she tells both Orpah, which I always want to read Oprah. Every time I read it, I want to switch those letters around. So Orpah and Ruth were the daughter-in-laws, and she tells them, I'm going back to where I came from. I don't have anything here. There's nobody to take care of me here. I have to go back to where somebody will feed me, provide for me, whatever. And so she tells her girls just to stay. You just go on back to your families, find somebody else to marry to take care of you, because women, we don't have any other choice. So at first, Orpah and Ruth are both like, no, we're going with you. Well, she just keeps pleading. Naomi just keeps trying to talk him out of it, And I think that's a lot to do with because there's a lot of law in the Old Testament about what a foreigner can and cannot do. So Naomi was going back home where she wouldn't be a foreigner. She followed God. She was a child of God. They weren't. They were foreigners. So now, not only is Naomi, she doesn't have anybody to take care of her as far as a man goes, but she's also possibly bringing these foreigners back with her, which is going to make her more of an outcast. So there's a lot going on here, a lot of details that aren't written down specifically, but because of all the law and the way that it was in the Old Testament, is still going on. So she finally convinces Orpah to turn around and go back. And Naomi just refuses. Ruth just refuses to go back. And so this is the verse in here. Let's see. Where is it? Okay. So this verse in here, when she's pleading with Naomi that she's not going to turn around. So I'm in Ruth chapter 1, verse 16. You hear it a lot in weddings used. Like I know that when Ashley married Michael, this was part of her vows to him. Do not persuade me to leave you or go back and not follow you. For wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do this to me, and even more, if anything but death separates you and me. So this is a pretty big moment too, because Ruth is from Moab. So they worshipped pagan gods, and I don't know which ones in general, but the Asherah poles and Baal, however you say that. So there's a lot of stuff going on, false worship, and idols and gods and stuff, idolatry that shouldn't have been going on. But here in this moment, not only is she pledging her loyalty to Naomi, like, I'm not leaving you no matter what you tell me to do, I'm just going to be over here following you, but I've also pledged to follow your God. Now, this has to speak a lot. Naomi gets a little bitter when she gets back to where they're going, to Bethlehem. But you have to wonder the amount of faith they must have exhibited for Ruth to turn this way, right? So Naomi and her husband and her children must have been pretty devout Christians, even though they, well, I guess not Christians, but followers of God, even though they left their homeland and they were in the midst of all of this false worship and because they obviously rubbed off on her. So not only am I going to leave everything I know, go somewhere knowing that there's nobody to take care of us, but I'm also going to follow you because I follow your God. So that's a pretty big thing that happens here too. So read Ruth 1:6 through 18. Al, you want to read that for me? It's on the bottom of page 8, that question. Ruth 1:6 through 18. Because we'll just stop here before we go on in the story.
Ruth 1:6. She and her daughter-in-laws prepared to leave the land of Moab because she had heard in Moab that the Lord had paid attention to his people's needs by providing them food. She left the place where she had been living, accompanied by her two daughters-in-law, traveled along the road leading back to the land of Judah. She said to them, "Each of you go back to your mother's home. May the Lord show faithful love to you as you have shown to the dead and to me. May the Lord enable each of you to find security in the house of your new husband." She kissed them, and they wept loudly. "No," they said to her, "we will go with you to your people." But Naomi replied, "Return home, my daughters. Why do you want to go with me? Am I able to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. Go on, for I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me to have a husband tonight and to bear sons, would you be willing to wait for them to grow up? Would you restrain yourselves from remarrying? No, my daughters, my life is much too bitter for you to share, because the Lord's hand has turned against me." Again they wept loudly, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. Naomi said, "Look, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her God. Follow your sister-in-law."
Okay, you can stop there because we already read the Forever you will go, I will go. Okay, so what do you think that exhibits about Ruth's faith? Knowing what we talked about so far. Like, what would you say? Does she have faith at all? Does she not have faith? I mean, if you put yourself in that situation and you're going to leave everything that you know to follow someone you haven't known. I think when we did our Bible study over Ruth, they may have been married like 8 years. So your whole life growing up in one place, and then somebody that you've been in close proximity to for about 8 years, and now you're just going to pick up and follow. And then what do you guys think about that? I don't know that I could do it.
I think you would have to have some kind of faith to be able to do that.
Right. And I think it must, like I said earlier, I think it must have been exhibited in Naomi and her husband's life, their faith to God, even though they left and were living in a land that they probably ought not be living in. You know, so I think that, you know, if she was willing to leave everything that she knew to go somewhere with a woman and they had no way to support themselves, that's pretty big. I mean, I feel like that's pretty big. So what do you guys think about faith? Like, if you had to give somebody a working definition, what would you say it was?
Faith, I think putting your whole trust in the Lord and just following whatever you think is right for yourself and what God's wanting to do.
Okay. Anybody else? I know there's a lot of acronyms for it when I was in youth group. I think that for me, I don't exhibit a lot of faith. That's one area that I really struggle with, because if somebody else is going through tragedy or whatever, I'm really quick to be able to pull scripture that I feel like applies to the situation and to speak life and to encourage, and I'm really good unless it's me. And then I'm like, woe is me, I'm going to die alone. You can't handle this. I don't know why, but it's like all of a sudden when it's me in the situation, I don't have faith. Most of the time and it's not that I don't think that he has the power to come through. I think maybe I've just convinced myself that I'm not important enough. There's bigger things going on. My problem don't worry, I don't know, it's really weird. But I don't really exhibit a lot of faith. And I think that's why I have a really hard time to pray boldly. I've always heard that, to approach the throne audaciously and boldly, and I always thought maybe it was a sovereignty problem, that I thought he was too sovereign to talk to like that, until I read something that was like, it's not a sovereignty problem, it's a faith problem. You either think he A, can't handle it, or that he won't. And I was like, well, it hit me right here. So I struggle with faith a lot. So to continue with the story, okay, so in chapter 2, Ruth meets Boaz, and in chapters 3 and 4, her future is secured. So just to give you an overview and keep me from rambling, I'm just going to read it out of the book here. Excuse me. In this great romance of the Old Testament, Ruth went to Boaz's field to pick up grain. Boaz, a relative of Naomi, condoned Ruth gleaning in the field and provided meals for the widows. Let me stop right there and add this. That is part of the law, that a foreigner could glean in the fields, and that's just a word meaning that when they were going through and picking grain like the workers, they're not going to catch everything. Obviously, they're human. So after they worked the field over and got everything, they were never supposed to go back and pick up what they left behind. That was intended to be for foreigners like Ruth, and Naomi's kind of foreign in this instance, to be able to feed themselves. Okay, so Boaz, by allowing her, telling her that's okay, is upholding what God said to do. And if you actually read the scriptures, Boaz